are being pigeonholed into these sort of tribal corners because of the language that's being used. So I agree, we need to be careful about how we state things, but I think it's also a matter of awareness. And, it's not a liberal issue. It's not a conservative thing. It's even though cannabis has always sort of been associated with a liberal agenda. But it's interesting, and I saw that you interviewed someone from Acreage not too long. Well, that was your 100th episode, right? And
yeah, Kevin Murphy, the CEO of Acreage Holdings.
Right, and it's my understanding that the former Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, is sitting on the board. Now, I found that to be really fascinating when he first announced that he was going into the cannabis industry, because so many people had associated the Republican platform with the Just Say No era. And you would think that opening up this market, this free market of cannabis and all of the opportunity that that could bring, not to mention hemp, but, the freedom to be able to operate and make money on a harmless plant in a capitalistic society seems like that should have always been the agenda of the Republican Party, or at least those who consider themselves to be fiscal conservatives, which I've always been. I've always considered myself that way. So I've always found it interesting that, it's been associated with riffraff and weed being associated with hippies, and the black market being targeting the African American community or people of color. So yeah, you raised an interesting point there.
Well, the polling also shows that it is it's not bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. Consumption rates amongst conservatives are the same as amongst liberals. The consumption rates among Caucasians are the same as amongst people of color. This is not a black or white thing. This is not a left or right thing. This is just a right thing, as in the right thing to do.
And let me just interject something there. Yeah, the usage is the same across the board, and it's nonpartisan in terms of what the potential of the cannabis industry. But it is a very divisive issue when it comes to prosecuting crimes associated with cannabis. And like you said, it does target the communities of color and the lower income neighborhoods of Caucasian users. Yep. And that disparity has been it's been an egregious miscarriage of justice, in my opinion, and I've heard a lot of people say that, actually, so I don't own that phrase, but it is.
The statistics also are incontrovertible, right? I'm a white guy. I'm almost 50. I work in New York City. I live in New Jersey. And if I was stopped by a police officer for smoking a joint going down the street, most probably I wouldn't even get a ticket. If I was African American, I'm 4 times as likely to get arrested as a white guy. So, and there are lots of reasons why behind that. It comes to the way that police are compensated, the way that the statistics are collected, the way that the DEA actually provides excess military equipment to police departments across the country. I mean, the war on drugs has been the biggest boondoggle in the history of the United States. It is the most corrupt, ill-guided decision that we have ever made as a society. And one of the cool things about my podcast is I get to talk to the people who are the advocates. Like one of my favorite people in the entire industry is a guy named Chris Crane, who is the president of a multi-state operator called Forefront. Chris was a founder of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, which is the largest college-based advocacy organization out there, bigger than the college Dems, bigger than the college Republicans, and their goal is to end the war on drugs. Well, Chris helped found that and has since, morphed from being an advocate into one of the smartest operators in the space. And he's a client of mine, and has since become a friend. And I learn from him every time I talk to him, whether it's on the podcast or just talk to him about this intersection between the this tension between the suits and the stoners, right? I mean, there is this tension between the historic illicit market participants who are trying their hardest to get regulated and legal, and the suits, the John Boehners of the world, who are looking at this as a phenomenal market opportunity, and don't have either an understanding or an acknowledgement of the history of what's happened in the industry. Now, when Speaker Boehner, announced that he was joining then the advisory board and now the board of directors of Acreage, a lot of the historic market participants were absolutely furious at him because he was somebody who was a drug warrior of the first rank when he was in Congress, and he was somebody who had said he would never consider cannabis, and he still has says he won't consume. And they think that his decision to join was based solely on opportunity. I don't care. We need everybody to be pro cannabis regulation and legalization. Everybody, left, right, center, purple, brown, black, I don't care who they are. They need to be in favor of this as quickly as possible to avoid the issues like we're having with the vape issue, to avoid people being arrested for nonviolent drug crimes, to make sure that people are given access to the plant from a medicinal purpose as quickly as possible. The longer it remains in the shadows, the more people who are going to be continually hurt by those shadows.
I couldn't agree more. And you know what? He deserves kudos for being in the industry more so than he would deserve any kind of criticism for having advocated against it for so long in a position of power. And I think we have to take the wins when we get them, and we have to acknowledge those wins. For example, even if people criticize the president for his wall policy or this or that, you got to give him kudos when he actually signs into law a Criminal Justice Reform Act that was long overdue. You know what I mean? So no matter what you feel about someone's politics, it's really a good idea to acknowledge their compassionate acts when they do happen, and because otherwise you deter others from making that change and you keep people in their tribal corners fighting against something that makes no sense. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you know what? I think that, the shedding the light in the shadows is really important, and it will stay important as long as cannabis is still prohibited substance in Schedule 1, which is, of course, it never should have been. And you and I both know that, and most people know that by now. It's a harmless plant. But let's go back to...
No, it's more than forget a harmless plant. It has legit medicinal value.
Oh, yeah.
And the crazy thing is that because it's been Schedule 1, there's been no research into it. So, there's this CBD craze in the country now, right? Everywhere you turn, some sort of consumer packaged good has cannabidiol in it. Well, I would love to know what the actual quantities that you should be taking are. We don't know, right? We don't know, other than Epidiolex, which is the only FDA approved cannabis-derived drug. What the dosages are. That's absurd. Absolutely absurd.
It is absurd.
There's more research done on the medical benefits of LSD, and we can talk about psychedelics some other time, than on cannabis, right? I mean, and there's tremendous medical benefits to that stuff, to psychedelics. The Schedule 1 designation for things like cannabis and psilocybin and other plant-based medicines has hurt millions and millions of people in the United States alone, let alone the billions of people who should have access to these drugs around the world. And they are all illegal globally because of us. If we had not scheduled all of these drugs in the 70s, there would be tremendous research done globally, and we would not be facing the epidemics that we are in mental health, in hypertension, all of these other issues that can be addressed by these plants.
Well, not to mention, opiate addiction, which, has declined slightly since cannabis has been legalized in the states where it's legal. But
No, 15%. You look at the statistics in Colorado. The amount of opiate scripts are down something like 15% in that state since it went adult use. I mean, it is absurd, and we're talking on the radio and on a podcast right now, and I do a weekly podcast. That's the real value of this form of communication, is because this is an issue that is sorely under discussed in the mainstream media. There's not enough room for a nuanced conversation about the medical benefits of this stuff. Like, you'll get one-off stories, but you get, I do an hour every week with somebody that is related to this industry. It could be Mike Tyson talking about his experience as being a cannapreneur, going from being a boxer to Tyson Ranch, to Congressman Earl Blumenauer, or former Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Democrat, far left Democrat, far right Republican, talking about the regulatory structures of this. For me, it has been the most fulfilling thing I have done in my career, because I have gotten to learn from people who are significantly smarter than me about an issue that I hope is clear that I'm pretty passionate about.
Well, you're clearly passionate about it, and rightly so. I mean, cannabis is one of those things I've been very passionate myself about, because I am convinced that it can save us on so many levels, from hemp and climate change, from cannabis and the human body, and optimizing human health and all of that. And the importance of knowledge about this plant, it can never be overstated. And the importance of what it can do for our economy and for the future, it's unbelievable.
Oh, it's unbelievable. The tax opportunities for local communities is it's off the hook. But the amount of money that states can generate from a well-regulated, well-taxed industry really can be transformational. I look at what's going to happen in New Jersey, what is going to happen in New York State, from a tax basis, and states that have hugely underfunded pension commitments will be able to hopefully, if they're smart about how they use these tax revenues, fund those pension commitments, make sure that teachers' pensions are protected, to make sure that police and firefighter pensions are protected. It's also going to change the cost structures of local law enforcement, right? If a police officer doesn't have to spend any time looking for, busting somebody for smoking a joint, they can spend their time actually dealing with real crime and helping, getting back to protect and serve, which is really what the thesis of a police department is. And a lot of these men and women who wear the blue, not by choice, but by policy, have had to make, decisions that they probably wouldn't want to make.
You're so right. I interviewed Steve D'Angelo a couple months ago, and we talked about this issue. He just started a nonprofit organization called Last Prisoner Project. And what I found really astonishing from that conversation was how many people are still in jail because of cannabis, or nonviolent cannabis prosecution. And there are even people still serving life sentences, even in states where cannabis is fully legal for adult use. I mean, it's absurd. And they keep losing their appeals because, they were guilty of breaking the law at the time. But does cannabis possession or use warrant a lifetime sentence in jail because of either mandatory minimums or 3 strike laws? No. And not all of these have been commuted. I know that during the Obama administration, he commuted a lot of sentences for nonviolent drug crimes, from possession of heroin all the way to just a simple joint and everything in between. But there's still so many people who were not on the list for consideration. And that needs to change. I think that as soon as they deschedule cannabis, and I think it's a matter of when, not if, they need to start going back into the records of these people, even if they were arrested 3 times for having a joint in their pocket, and most of them are people of color, and start releasing them immediately and making reparations so that they can get a foothold into